Hey everybody, welcome back. This week we are going to discuss the subtle psychological shift that needs to happen if you're going to get the most out of therapy and change in the way that you really want to. It is a lot of fun to criticize therapy, to criticize the state of psychology, mostly because it's really easy. CBT, that's the one we rip on the most around here, only focuses on the symptoms of your issues, never the underlying cause. It is the acetaminophen painkiller of therapy, working on the effects, not the underlying reasons for the effects. So of course, it's never going to work in the long term. Feminist therapy, multiculturalism therapy, it takes the responsibility away from you and places it on society. And indeed, a lot of the interventions in multiculturalism or feminist therapy hinge on your activism to change society. You can't change yourself, but you can change society, according to these theories. And even depth psychology, which is what my therapy is based on to the largest extent, but depth psychology lacks specific concrete application. It understands that your unconscious is seen in the reflection of your issues. And any issue you have is a reflection of your unconscious. That's another way of saying what I just said. But it's not specific. It doesn't understand the structure of your unconscious. It doesn't understand specifically how your emotions work, how we can boil them down to their fundamental parts. We can work on those parts and the problems take care of themselves. That's what we do here at Animus. And these are all problems in psychology, all problems in therapy. But even if you get good therapy through Animus, through maybe a more tuned-in depth psychologist or tuned-in Jungian who understands, the pitfalls of some of the more woo-woo aspects of those theories. Even if you get good therapy, you still may not get good therapy. A lot of it hinges on you and the mentality that you bring, your attitude, at the risk of sounding like a dad from the Midwest. It's about having a good attitude, and it's a subtle shift that needs to happen. And I thought of this because I took a road trip last week to California, in California now, and I was listening to a lot of the NPR podcast, How I Built This, or How I Built That. And anyway, it's about entrepreneurs and their stories of how they developed their product or their service or their company. And it got me thinking that the way that they are working on building their business is the same attitude, is the same entrepreneurial spirit that we need to bring to therapy. I think a lot of us go around our lives and we see ourselves as employees, as just looking around for other people to tell us what to do, not really putting in the effort, not really committing fully to what we want to achieve. And we bring the same attitude to therapy. And, I can do a lot to help you along with that attitude. I can get you to think about your life in certain ways and become more aware, so that attitude is much more likely to take hold in your psyche. But I think it still helps to talk about bringing this entrepreneurial spirit, this boss mentality instead of an employee mentality. And maybe you could say that a lot of this is indoctrinated into us because of public schools. I don't know. But the point is, I think most people go around with an employee mentality as opposed to a boss mentality. Because most people are employees. Most people don't own companies. But when it comes to improving your psychology, it's important to be the boss. Of course you're going to be the boss, because who else is going to change your psychology ultimately besides you? So I think there are some indications of shift between an employee mentality and others to the boss mentality. And one of those that comes to mind, well, the first one, even before we start with number one, let's start with point zero, which is commitment. A lot of people go into therapy and they're like, well, I'll sort of try it, I sort of won't, and I'll do a couple sessions, see what happens. If there's no real commitment there, then the growth, the change, you're not going to be able to do what you really need to do, to put in not the effort, but to bring an awareness, to bring every fiber of your being, to handling whatever neurosis that you have. So the first thing I would say is simply commitment. But after commitment, it's, are you willing to make your own decisions? A lot of people, when they go into therapy, and therapists, that they will oblige this request, they want the therapist to tell them what to do. Oh, I'm in a difficult relationship with my boyfriend or my girlfriend. Should I break up with them, or should we stay together? And a therapist will tell them. But in order to be your boss, you need to make your own decisions, because it's only when you make your own decision will you ever learn from it. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is if you go to your therapist and he gives you advice and the advice works. Because then what are you going to do the next time you're in a tricky situation? You have to go back to the therapist or whoever else happens to be closest to you at the time, whoever you can latch onto psychologically. Please tell me what to do, but that's not what bosses do. Bosses need to make their own decision, because they know that only when they do that will they ever reap the rewards from that decision, or the negative consequences. But that's okay too, because negative consequences, we can learn and we can grow. Another thing that people, how they bring an employee mindset to therapy is in the time commitment. I mean, if you're an employee, you clock in, you clock out 40 hours a week, that's it. What do you do if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a boss? If your commitment is on the line, if your livelihood is on the line with this business, it's all the time, you're always working it. People say, oh, I work 100 hours a week. You probably don't work 100 hours a week. I doubt that you can do that. I mean, maybe for a week or two you can do that, but I just don't believe anybody who says that they do a sustained 100, 110 hour weeks. But in a way, you are working all the time, because even when you're playing pool with your friends or walking around the block, you're always thinking. You're always awareness. It's not work. It's just awareness. It's just constant thinking about what you could be doing, how you could be more aware, where your blind spots are. And of course, this is why you go to a therapist and go to a group, but it still helps to think about it yourself. And when you really zero in on the one kind of decision that you are making or not making, as the case may be, that leads to your neurosis, you really become aware, and you're always aware of when that decision point comes up and how you respond. So it's just this constant vigilance, I would say, just to being more aware. Also, with what entrepreneurs do that employees don't is it's a constant iterations. They're always trying something new. If one marketing slogan doesn't work, they'll try another one. They'll test something else. They'll get a different perspective from another marketing consultant. If one product isn't selling that well, they'll change it. They'll change the color schemes. It's just constant iterations, as opposed to the employee mindset, which is, well, I'll just try this one thing, and if it works, I'll just go to my boss or supervisor and just go, oh, it didn't work. What do I do? And that's really important to keep in mind when it comes to growing in the clinic the way that you really want. Is it's just going to take constant communication. Oftentimes when people are in therapy, they say, oh, I don't want to talk about this. We talked about this already. No, you got to talk about it in different ways, from a slightly different perspective. And when you go out and you try to not just change the way you communicate in therapy, but change the way that you communicate in the rest of the world, you're going to have to try out different ways of communication, let's say. For instance, maybe one of your problems is hiding. You're very good at hiding or being dishonest. Maybe not dishonest how we would typically think of it, but lying through omission. Well, when you start to change the way that you communicate, people are going to think it's weird, and you're going to have to try in a lot of different ways to fit a new communication style to your personality. And it's going to take a bunch of iterations, and you're going to fail and look stupid, which brings me to my next point, is risk. There's a lot of at least perceived risk when it comes to growing psychologically. And there's a lot of risk with being an entrepreneur, with starting a business. That's one of the benefits of being an employee, is because there's no risk. Yeah, you're not going to get that much money, and you're trading your time in for money, which is even worse. It almost doesn't matter how much money you make. But the benefit of that is there's no risk. But with entrepreneurship and with being a patient in the clinic, it's about taking a risk. And sometimes, in fact, no, not sometimes, all the time, you're going to have to put yourself in situations, even if it's just talking about a sensitive topic, you're going to look stupid. There's no way around it. You're going to look stupid if you're going to want to change and grow. But if you just bring this employee mindset to it, you think, okay, well, I'm only going to do what I'm comfortable doing in the rest of my life, which is bringing this employee mindset to different things. And that's what I'm going to bring to therapy. And then even if you do get good therapy, either from me or from a tuned in depth psychologist, it's not going to matter unless you're really willing to take that risk, to look stupid. So those are just some thoughts I had about, look, we can complain all the time about poor therapy, CBT, feminist therapy, multiculturalism therapy, woo-woo, California 1970s, depth psychology kind of therapy. But if we're not willing to really take full responsibility through commitment, through always being aware, by being eternally vigilant about our issues once we boil it down, go to animusempire.com to learn more about how we can boil down all of your neurosis into one decision point. I do think it's possible. And it really makes, it doesn't make it easier to overcome your neurosis, but at least it's simple. At least you know the one thing you're doing. And, it's not the thing that causes everything, but I think most people have one decision point in their life from which flows at least 95% of their neuroses. So that's it for this week. I just wanted to really drive home that point, and I was listening to that NPR podcast, How I Built That, or this, and I'm thinking, man, the way you build a company is exactly the way you build up your psychology, by tearing down your weaknesses and looking at your strengths and understanding how to communicate those two things in the best possible way to the world. And how is that not exactly the same thing as releasing a service or releasing a product to the marketplace, especially when the marketplace isn't ready for that service or product, and it almost never is. It always takes a bunch of iterations, a lot of risk, a lot of commitment, and just a lot of awareness and vigilance. So that's it for this week, guys. Thank you again for joining me. Please like and subscribe, and always remember that when it comes to managing your psychological issues, you're going to first need to learn how to be the boss.